Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at the new entry-level iPad. This is the new 10.2-inch 7th generation device. This replaces the 9.7 6th generation device that we looked at here on the channel not all that long ago. And we're going to see what's new about this one, how it performs, and whether or not you should go for this one or perhaps try to find one of the 6th gen devices that are still available at the time I'm recording this video. We'll get to the review here in just a second, but I do want to let you know in the interest of full disclosure that I paid for this iPad with my own funds. All the opinions you're about to hear are my own. Nobody is paying for this review, nor has anyone reviewed or approved what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get into it now and see what this new iPad is all about. So let's take a closer look now at the hardware. This starts at $329 with 32 gigabytes of storage. They have a 128 gigabyte version for a little bit more. I suspect, like the other iPad, we'll see price reductions from various retailers as they get out into the marketplace, so be on the lookout for lower prices. Now this one has a larger display than the prior entry-level version. It's a 10.2-inch display versus a 9.7-inch on the old one. The result here is that you're going to have a few more pixels that you can make use of, which is useful for doing split screen and other things. You can fit a little bit more on the screen and things may look a little less scrunched, but you're not looking at all that many more pixels here, maybe about 100 or so, depending on which way you have the screen oriented. So it's not a huge jump. It is a Retina display, so you'll have a nice super sharp photo and text experience on here. It's 264 points per inch, and they rate the brightness at about 500 nits. It is a nice and bright display, but of course you will get a better quality display on the more expensive iPads. What this one lacks is a lamination layer that you'll have on the Pro and the Air edition of the iPads, which costs more. So this one may show grime and fingerprints a little bit more readily than the other one does, but it's still very high quality and it feels like an Apple product. It doesn't feel cheap to me. Now, like the prior edition of the entry-level iPad, it does support the Apple Pencil and its alternatives. We did a video on all the different options you have with these low-end iPads for Apple Pencil devices, so definitely check that out. We'll look at its pencil performance in a few minutes here. Now, what's been added to this new one that wasn't on the prior edition of the entry-level is support for the Apple Smart Keyboard covers. And that's what these three little dots here are at the bottom. So when you buy your $159 keyboard, yes, it costs that much, it'll attach to that magnetically, and it will work as a screen protector, but you can also fold it out and get a pretty nice keyboard, actually. I've been using these keyboards now for the last couple of years, and I've been pretty happy with the performance on them. They are relatively easy to type on. They've got nice key separation here, and it's something that I can type very rapidly on, even though the keys here are definitely not your traditional kind of keyboard. I'm really quite fond of it. It doesn't connect via Bluetooth, so you don't have to worry about pairing or anything else like that. And I've really grown to love these keyboards quite a bit, despite their high price tag. I was expecting perhaps a less expensive keyboard that might be available for this, but no, it's the same keyboard that they use on the iPad Air. So you will be paying a premium for the keyboard at $159, and if you opt for the Apple Pencil, that's about another $100 there. So you can really escalate the cost of these things pretty quickly there. Now the weight on the iPad is about 1.07 pounds or 483 grams. That is without the keyboard cover. With it, it adds just about a pound, so it's 1.97 pounds with the keyboard cover or 730 grams. So about the same weight we've seen on prior editions of the iPad. There's a cellular version of this in addition to the one we have here, which is just Wi-Fi. That cellular version adds a little bit of weight to the mix, but it's roughly about the same weight. So beyond the larger screen and the keyboard connector, you largely have the same iPad you've been accustomed to here with their new entry-level model. It does have the TouchID sensor here. The performance on it is the same as it was in the prior edition. Not super fast, but fast enough to get into it. That TouchID sensor doubles as a home button, so you can push that button to go home or double tap it to get your multitasking menu up there. But you can also choose to use gesture controls now, so you can swipe up from the bottom there to go home. You can get your multitasking thing up by doing a slower swipe. So a lot of the newer features on the newer iPads with the gestures will also work here. You got a front-facing camera here, 1.2 megapixels, nothing spectacular, but good enough for FaceTime. It'll record 720p video out of the front. The rear camera, I believe, is the same as last year as well, 8 megapixels, 1080p at 30 frames per second max video. It will do slow-mo 720p at 120 frames per second. Not the best photo quality and certainly not the best video quality, but it's good enough, I think, given the price point here, and probably better than other low-cost tablets from other manufacturers. So that's not too bad on that front. Your volume controls are right here as they were before. Your power switch is where it usually is. And you have a headphone jack, which surprisingly is not on the higher-end models. So if you want to connect up some old-fashioned headphones, you can do that for better audio quality. The speakers are located here at the bottom. Like most iPad models, they sound pretty nice. And also in between there, if my camera decides to focus again, we will also take a look at the Lightning connector. This does not have USB-C like the Pro iPads have, but you will get the charging cable in the box along with a charger. And of course, Apple will be happy to sell you a number of Lightning peripherals that will plug in for connecting up memory cards and cameras and other things. iPad OS now is friendlier to external storage. So there are a number of Lightning USB sticks you can plug in, for example, for moving movie files back and forth and that sort of thing. So you can take advantage of all of the new iPad OS features related to external storage with this entry-level model. Now, surprisingly, Apple did not update the processor on their entry-level iPad. And as a result, this will perform exactly the same as last year's model did, just with a larger display. So this is the A10 Fusion chip inside of here. And as you can see, for web browsing and all the other things that you might do on your iPad, this is going to be perfectly fine. The last one was adequate, but it was still surprising to see that Apple didn't put one of its newer processors in here. This processor now is about 3 years old, and they could have maybe gone up to the A11 or something that's a little bit more current, but instead it will perform where last year's version did. But despite that, it seems to be doing just fine, doing all of the things that you will do on your iPad. So things like YouTube here will work well in split screen, no problems there. I can make the screen larger and have everything move around without any real problems there. So I think from a performance standpoint, it doesn't need more power. I was just surprised that Apple wouldn't decide to put something more powerful in a new model, especially given that they're calling this a generation up from the prior version. We ran a benchmark test called the 3D Mark Slingshot test, and that's a way to measure its graphical capabilities and its CPU capabilities. And there we got a score of 3,710, and that is pretty much the same score we got last year on the 6th generation devices. You can see there. They're right in the margin of error with each other. You can also see what the iPad Pro 11 can do versus this one. So if you want to go to the high end, that's the performance bump you're going to get. So the performance is fine. I would have liked to have seen a newer processor just to give us a little bit more future proofing. But for the most part, games like Sonic Racing here tend to target devices like this one, because this is what most people have versus the more pro-level devices. As you can see, the game is running just fine. I'm using a PlayStation 4 controller because the new version of iPad OS, which is now available, allows you to use PlayStation and Xbox One controllers with your iPad. So there's a lot of great games to play. They all run just fine. The performance of this device is below that of a Nintendo Switch, but for the most part, the games do look and run nicely on here, just like they would on a higher-end device. And you can also do some things you might do on a higher-end device. So I've got iMovie running right now on my iPad with some clips that I shot with my iPhone. These came in at 60 frames per second, 4K. And as you can see here, we had a cross dissolve with really little lag here. I can do things as well like add in another layer of video, so we can do a picture-in-picture here. There's some green screen capabilities you've got with this as well. I can maybe shorten this clip up a little bit and move it into the middle here and try to play this back and see how it goes. You can adjust the position of things. You get a lot of flexibility with a fairly low-end app here. You can see it choked a little bit when we did that cross dissolve along with the picture-in-picture, but I think if you let it render for a minute, it should go a little smoother in future. There it goes, a little bit better that time. So you can see some of the limitations of the hardware here, but you can get a lot of cool things done with this. So I'm finding that even on these low-end models, like we saw last year, you can run a lot of high-level creative apps without much of a performance penalty. This is Procreate, which is a very involved drawing application. As you can see here, navigation is really quick. I can select brushes here with my pencil, just like I can do on an iPad Pro, and start drawing on here, and things just seem to work pretty nicely on it, and I haven't really found much to complain about, even at the low end here. The pencil seems to work fine as well, so we can pull up Apple Notes here and give you a quick demo of that. So what I've got now is the marker selected. I can do a very light touch, and you can see we get a light line, or I can push down harder and get a darker line. It does the angle sensitivity and all the other things that you can do with the Apple Pencil, so that's been working. Earlier I tested the Logitech Crayon and the Adenit pencil that we looked at a few weeks ago. These are less expensive alternatives. Those work fine on here as well. And Apple really has the best stylus on the market, and you can get that here in this low-end version. Now, Apple rates the battery life of this device at 10 hours, and I would agree with that assessment if you're doing things like web browsing or some light applications like word processing or email. If you start playing games on it or you start doing some video editing, that of course will impact the battery a little bit more significantly, but by and large you shouldn't have an issue with battery life with these iPads. They're all good, and this one is as good as the ones that came before it. Overall, I think it's a good, solid entry-level device for Apple. It brings in a lot of features that were on their higher-end iPads only a few years ago at a much more affordable price. So I think if you want an iPad, you're not giving up all that much here in performance by going for the entry-level model. I will say, though, that this is not a huge jump over last year's model, namely because it has the same chip inside. So if you find one of those 6th generation versions and you're okay at 9.7 inches versus 10.2, I think it's probably worth it to pay less and get the 6th generation one, given that it is essentially the same iPad inside. So definitely be on the lookout for those. I think they'll have some good prices on those as this one begins to replace it on store shelves. But if you find this one at a good price, you do get a larger screen. You have the option now to buy that expensive keyboard and plug it in. So it's definitely an improvement. I wouldn't call it, though, a generational improvement, given that the internals here are largely the same. But it's a good iPad through and through. That'll do it for this one. Until next time, this is Lon Seidman. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold-level supporters, the 4 Guys with Quarters podcast, Chris Allegretta, Tom Albrecht, Mike Talbert, Brian Parker, and Kalyan Kumar. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to Lon.TV/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/s.